Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Segal number SE19323. This is their classic deadbolt that you're going to see installed on apartment doors is really where you see it most. Residential applications, certainly basement doors of residential applications. Commercial installations, I've personally installed these for folks on their steel doors and frames because they are quite partial to the Segal surface mount deadbolt type lock. It has existed for several decades and continues today to be a very important option when it comes to providing security for folks, doing so in a way that is genuinely secure in both its physical attributes, but in the mental attributes that it imbibes to the person who is asking for the security. Translation, people feel safe with this lock. And this video is going to be an overview of this variant of the Segal SE19323, which basically means the part number. It's the surface mount deadbolt. It's going to be double cylinder. It'll have a key on the outside, which is normal, but it'll have a key on the inside as well. Okay, so you need a key to lock or unlock from either side. It will be in a brushed chrome type finish, which is not typical because all the Segal locks were, of course, always typical bronze color. And it will include a flat strike, which is normal and common. Segal does manufacture an angle strike, which you can purchase separately. If you want an angle strike version, they may not offer the lock with the angle strike only, and they currently do not for sure offer the lock with both strikes so that you can decide. The bottom line is, if you want to have both strikes, you're just going to simply order the angle strike as a separate item. This is what the box looks like. Oop. They offer these as in a clamshell sort of packaging as well, which is just, if you had a retail environment, you'd certainly probably want a clamshell package situation. However, regardless of the packaging, the contents are identical. So, however you want it packed, doesn't really matter, you'll get the same contents. The next portion of this video is going to be a review of the physical contents of the package. Now, let's open up the box and see what we've got going here. Okay, so we've got the cover off, and you've got this little plastic piece. Then the body's going to come out, the business end. And as we said before, it's a double cylinder, so it's going to have that key on the inside. And this portion of the video, again, is just a visual review of all of the components. You know, while we have the pieces in our hand, let's also take some dimensional properties. This little tang is called the shutter guard. The shutter guard is a spring-loaded flap that covers off the access for the tail piece. Should the cylinder be removed from the exterior or locked side of the door, pulled out, that shutter guard is snapped and going to close that off, helping prevent an unapproved intrusion through the space. Okay. Since we've got the lock body, let's take some dimensions. Overall height, about 2 7/8, as you can see. Let's take a gander at the center to center of the screw holes. The vertical looks like it's about 2 1/2. The overall width, let's take it from the back side of the body, about 4 1/2. The horizontal center to center of the screw holes looks like it's going to be right at about 1 5/8. Okay, maybe 1 11/16. Thickness of the body, not including the cylinder, about 1 1/16. Thickness out to the face of the cylinder looks like it's going to be about 1 11/16. Okay, getting down through the rest of the body, let's continue on looking. Okay, let's pull out some more packaging. The installation instructions are here, and they're also linked to down below this video. And we'll get on to that next. Now, we're going to have the exterior cylinder. This is going to be a typical Segal keyway. Nice, smooth action. Not the greatest, but not the worst, that's for sure. But a decent quality, decent smooth action. This is called a rim cylinder. That tail piece is going to be vertical. It can be vertical or it can be horizontal for installation onto this lock. Can it be? It doesn't matter. It's vertical. I don't know why I would even mention that. It's vertical, which is actually a benefit. It'll be easier to install into the door because when they're horizontal, what will happen, the trouble with rim cylinders is that tailpiece falls down a little bit. But when it's vertical, you can keep it straight because you're pushing it through the door. Okay, a couple of original Segal key blanks. And question all the time is, can we rekey these? We can, but it has to be to a Segal keyway. So if you wanted 4 of these or 3 of these all keyed alike, we can certainly make that happen for you without any trouble at all. Okay. A couple of dimensions on the rim cylinder since we're going through dimensions. Overall thickness of the body is about 1 1/8 inches. To the back of that tail piece is about 3 5/16. Diameter of the face on the outside is about 1 1/4 inches. This is going to take about 1 1/4 inches hole through the door, but we'll get to the template review or the installation instruction review. Now, we had mentioned earlier about the strikes. Well, here is the flat strike. And this is the strike that you're going to get with this material. Overall height of the strike, about 4 1/8. Overall width, about 1 1/16 inches. Thickness looks like it's about 3/16 to an overall projection of about 1 inch. Okay. We're going to go over the installation of this when we get to the installation instructions. You're going to have then a bag of bolts. We're going to go over all those as we go through the installation details. You'll have a cylinder collar, which you'll use for that exterior. Okay. Then you're finally going to have your plate. And this plate is what you... and we'll get into the installation instructions, when you're installing the lock, the exterior, the rim cylinder, the exterior cylinder has to go on first. This is the plate that you use to mount that to the door first, and then your lock body comes over it and screws to the face of the door. Okay, that concludes all of the parts that are included with this lock. The next portion of this video is going to touch on the steps of reviewing the installation instructions. Now, the next part of this video is to go over the extended description details in a summary view of this lock. So again, this lock is going to be the flat strike only, and we discussed how to get the angle strike should you want it. I believe I gave you that part number earlier. You know what, I may not have, in fact, and let's pull it up right now. So the Segal angle strike, and there will be a link below this video to the angle strike by the time you're seeing this video, so you can link right to it. That part number is SE, as in Segal, SE19323, and that will give you the angle strike version for this sort of item. Mounts to, with the flat strike, it will mount to a wood door or a metal door, wood frame, metal frame. I've installed them to steel doors and frames as well. The installation of the lock, depending on in-swing or out-swing of the door, will be something that will be important to review, which we will get into in the installation instructions, which are very much linked down below this video. If you're going to do an installation where you are mounting the lock body on what would be the push side of the door, A flat strike is going to be perfectly acceptable for that sort of installation. Just a flat strike. And in fact, if that's your installation method, then you can't use an angle strike. An angle strike would absolutely fall into importance if you were installing it in a pull side application, even though you can still use a flat strike for that installation. But an angle strike would be used if you wanted to substantially mortise the wood frame and then when attaching that strike, gain a significant amount of additional security because you've got screws going through the long leg of the strike and through the face of the strike into that jamb, and the screws that you'll get will be long enough with that angle strike that they'll sink down into the stud that's behind the wood frame. So if you're doing a wood frame, therefore a wood door most likely, in-swing application, you're mounting it on the pull side of the door, I should say, an angle strike would be a great option for that sort of installation. And again, there's a link below this video to the angle strike, actually to all of the strikes that would be compatible. Now, the next part of this video gets us prepared for installation, and that takes us to the installation instructions, and that's where we'll start now. Actually, before we move into the installation instructions, let's talk about the related products that exist for these Segal locks. And there is, down below this video, a table of related products, and that is going to include the different strikes that are available, the angle and the flat. Okay, that's going to include cylinder guards. Now, that doesn't mean that the cylinder guard or all of the parts are necessarily available in every finish that you might need, but the table that I'm looking at from the manufacturer shows that currently you can get almost everything. And what I mean is this. There are cylinder guard plates, rectangular plates that mount on the exterior of the door with carriage bolts that go through the door that will completely cover the head of your rim cylinder so as to really prevent break-in. There are the strikes, flat and angled. You can get those in both colors. There are the specialized screws that would come with these locks in the both colors. But if you, and before we get to that, there are replacement springs, which are not unheard of to have to replace. Over decades of use, a piece of metal can fatigue. That spring certainly can break. You can buy replacement cylinders for the exterior of the door, certainly, in either color, in specific key numbers as well. There are specialty one-way screws that you would use on the interior installation through the lock body, that when you try to turn the screwdriver counterclockwise, the screw is not going to be returned or rotated out. That screw is currently only available in the copper color. Then there are two shims, a 1/4 inch thick shim and a 1/2 inch thick shim, which you would literally place underneath this so as to build the effective door thickness out to account for an unusually thin door, maybe to also account for the fact that you need to deal with an unusual inset condition. If you're going to use the angle strike, but your door is not inset the typical 3/32 of an inch, maybe it's sunk into the frame a little bit further. Maybe you want to use a shim to stack that off a little bit and to pull it out. So keep that in mind, that those shims and those specialty one-way screws are only available listed here in the brushed brass finish. So be mindful if you need a couple of those accessories that you might not be able to get them in the color that you're looking for. The next part of this video now moves on to where we're going to set up for installation. Okay, there's going to be some tools that you're going to need to have available to you, and I've installed this lock before and can tell you that they're all required and important. Going through them, the center punch. The center punch is incredibly important that you have a center punch. Whether it be something that's spring-loaded and nice and fancy, or if it's just, you know, a railroad spike that you've ground down to a tip. Obviously not that, but a center punch, something that you can, a sharp tempered steel point that you can place onto your door and tap that and mark an exact hole precisely where you need it. Because a center punch, when you are drilling the holes for your hardware, whether you're pre-drilling for the screws, especially that, or when you are locating your cylinder placement, when you take your drill bit and the drill sits onto the face of the door or the frame, you don't want that drill bit to walk at all on you, because that makes for a miss or an ill-fitting piece of hardware. That center punch allows that drill bit to stay nested right into the center punch area that you've created and make a really nice straight hole. Okay, a hammer, yeah, you're going to need a hammer for that center punch. An 1 3/8 hole saw, along with an 1/8 of an inch drill bit. The 1 3/8 hole saw is going to be used for drilling the hole through the door, or at least on the exterior. Well, it'll be through the door to mount the exterior cylinder, provided there is one, and there almost always is. Sometimes someone will literally mount a lock without exterior access. In that case, you don't need that 1 3/8 hole through the door, but you would be drilling that 1 3/8 hole for the rim cylinder along with the collar that we had mentioned earlier. I'm going to get access to the collar now. You could literally go with, you should be able to go with about 1 1/4 hole, but there's nothing wrong with having a hole a little bit larger. In this case, 1 3/8 is what they're saying for the hole diameter, and you can see that that cylinder collar is going to well compensate for the hole that you drill. Then the diameter of the cylinder body itself is 1.17. So that is well below 1 3/8. You could probably make 1 1/4 work. Using 1 3/8 is not going to be a problem. I would likely use 1 1/4 because it's more common that you're going to have that size already, and then try to make that work rather than buying or purchasing an 1 3/8 hole saw, which you probably will never use again. Although the installation instructions do tell you 1 3/8, I would use 1 1/4 because you're drilling the hole accurately as well. Electric drill, yes, you'll need a way to work that stuff. Number 6 is going to be a slotted screwdriver. You will certainly need a slotted screwdriver, that's to be sure. Pliers and a hacksaw. You'll need both. That is because, and we're going to get to it later in this video, you're going to have to trim the length of the tailpiece, most likely, because this tailpiece length will allow you to accommodate doors substantially thicker than common, and you can cut it down and deal with your doors that are thinner than common. So needing a way to cut this without bending it is going to be important for you to have pliers to hold it, let's say, and a hacksaw to cut it. A slotted screwdriver will be needed for the screws that are going to come with. You'll need a Phillips as well. But you'll need, and what's interesting here is they have the one-way screws for this hardware, but they don't list them as available as separate items. And I'm going to discover from the factory if they are available as separate items and add those if they possibly are. You'll need a Phillips, guaranteed. You're going to use a slotted if you're going to put those one-way screws in. Be mindful of using those one-way screws. If you ever plan on having to remove the lock from the door, don't use them, because it's just going to make your job getting the lock off the face of the door more involved. Just use the Phillips drive if you feel like you're ever going to need to remove that lock body, such as to rekey it. If you're a locksmith and this is a client of yours that you call on routinely, don't use the one-way screws, but you already know that, because you're probably going to be there in a year to work on the door again, right? Moving through more of the installation instructions. Straight edge and level. A straight edge and a level. You're going to need a straight edge to be able to accurately measure the location of your holes when you're drilling through the door. Masking tape is handy, and I don't know exactly why they refer to that, but they may want to have you mask off with masking tape the part of the wood frame that you're going to mark with your angle strike or your flat strike if you're going to mortise that in. so that you can mark that off and then chisel right down through that marked off hole. That could be why they want that, but we'll discover that when we get to it. The next part of this video gets into the break-off tailpiece table, how we're going to cut that rim cylinder. Now let's cut those tailpiece, the tailpiece down along with the screws. The break-off tailpiece table is next to review. What's the door thickness? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. Obviously 1 3/4, 1 3/8. Other thicknesses, sure, it could be 2 1/4. That wouldn't be unheard of. And you'll notice from the table that the lock will go up to a 2 3/8 door thickness. So all that you need to do is measure, according to the installation instructions, the underside of where the tailpiece sits to whatever length is required per the table. So the most common example is 1 3/4. You're going to cut it off at the B break line, and on the tailpiece there are indeed 3 scored lines that are there. The B is going to be the middle. Okay, so you're literally, you don't have to measure anything, you're literally going to cut that right at that middle scored line, which is going to be 1 3/8. Let's see if that makes sense for us. It does indeed, 1 3/8. Then per the table, you're going to cut your screws at the Y notch. You've got your 2 screws for installing your hardware, and you've got your Y and your X. You're going to cut it there. Okay, you're going to want to be very careful to cut these items. Don't try to snap them, especially the tailpiece. I've had people call and say, you know, the key gets real hard as I'm turning it part of the way through. So we talk about why that could be. A misdrilled hole would certainly give that sort of symptom where the cylinder is not going straight through the door. Or if you have literally tried to snap that with a couple of pliers, you'll bend the tailpiece. So as the tailpiece goes through, the tailpiece needs to be laser beam straight, but if you're making it go like this, it'll get hard to turn that screw. So you want the tailpiece to be really flat after you've cut it. So pliers and your hacksaw, nice, you know, even put it into a vise and carefully cut it. Obviously a power tool if you're controlling it. A better example would be something 2 1/4, let's say. You know, that's not unheard of. You're going to cut it to 2-inch length. Measure it from underneath here, where I've got my tailpiece, my tape measure, right to 2-inch. That's not going to be to any scored line. You're going to need to take that down just a little bit and get it to fit. Now it might work. You stick it in there, it might work, but you don't want an excessive amount of tailpiece hanging into the lock case, because it will not work at a certain point, that's for sure. I've never tried it without cutting it onto a 2 1/4 door. And in that case, you do not cut the screw length down whatsoever. Okay, you have to prepare the hardware based on the door thickness. That's crucial. Now, we'll get into installing the rim cylinder as we go through the installation instructions. But in the upper right-hand corner, let's talk about the lock operating instructions and maintenance. Very low maintenance. Very low. If any maintenance is at all required, lithium grease is what they recommend. Lithium is preferred because it's quite long-lasting. It's very durable. It will not over time seek to fatigue the proper fluid motion of the parts on the interior of the lock. I fully discourage you to remove that case. There are 2 screws. You can remove those and take the case off. There are parts inside of there that are going to probably guaranteed shift. I've made lots of videos showing people how to put their lock back together, which I love to do. But the bottom line is there's no reason to go in there. Unless, of course, you're replacing a spring or a part, then in that case you have reason to go in there. But from a new installation perspective, no reason to go in there. In terms of the lithium grease, if the lock operation becomes sticky, place the lock into the unlocked position and spray with lithium grease into the opening below exposed by the unlocked bolt. And they're really referring to this area down in here. You can sure get some lithium grease in there and just spray away. And that wouldn't be the end of the world. I would prefer not to do that because you're going to get some leakage down on your door. But if you're not interested in becoming very curious with the lock, and I encourage you not to, the installation instructions from the manufacturer say get inside of there and shoot it with lithium grease. Cycle the lock many times, maybe some more. Have a rag with you to collect any drip, any spillage. You're going to operate it to distribute the lithium grease as well. Minimal care, the Segal lock will provide you with a lifetime of security, and in lots of cases, more than one lifetime. I've seen these locks decades and decades old. Once each year, apply a small amount of graphite into the exterior cylinder for proper lubrication. I don't argue that at all. Proper maintenance of moving parts. It's not just the oil in your car, but it's the lubrication in your lock is what will allow you to expect a lifetime of maintenance-free sort of trouble. The next part of this video gets into steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the installation, and 5, and 6, and 7. We're going to get through steps 1 through 8 for sure in the next part of the video. Okay, getting into steps 1 through 8 of the installation instructions. The template is included. That's a full-size paper template. One thing that I do if I'm doing some work and the template is not separate, I'll photograph this stuff or I'll scan it and then I'll keep it on file for future use. And then I'll have a copy of the original installation instructions, and then I'll take them and I'll cut my template out. I'll destroy the original to get the template, but I've got that copy. So you're going to apply the template to the door in step 1, and the straight edge comes into play in that you're ensuring that where you locate the template onto the door is straight, because you're drilling multiple holes, and all 5 in this case. All of them have to be on the door correct. They all have to be exactly where they need to be. So cut out the appropriate installation template and tape it to the inside of the door at the desired lock height. You'll notice on the template that there is a reference to the location of the swing of the door. You've got one side of the template for what's called the right-hand door, and the other side for a left-hand door. The template is assuming that you are going to be placing this on the pull side of the door, that you are doing a door that swings into the space and that you are pulling the door towards you when you're on the inside to open it. If you're mounting it on the other side, or pardon me, if you're mounting it on the push side, as I had talked about earlier, you're going to be on your own. In this case, I'd kind of get the strike and the lock body up there and hold it together and make sure it works. Have somebody help you hold it on there and then mark your holes. But the very definition of this template means that you're mounting it on the pull side of the door. So step 1 says, cut it out, apply it to the door on the inside of the door, and that means the pull side. The side of the template that you use is dependent on the swing of the door. Just match the diagram. Take care to position the template properly, aligned to the edge of the door, not the frame, to the edge of the door, and use a straight edge to level and ensure that it's placed correctly level on the door. Tape it onto the door. Make sure that the tape you're putting on the door doesn't peel away any paint or varnish. Moving into step 2, once you know that you've got it set and you've done a reality check, the height of where you want it mounted is correct. It's right on the edge of the door per the dashed line that's there, and it's attached to the door and really won't move on you at all. Double check all of that stuff. Be nothing worse than putting it absent-mindedly on the wrong side of the door, center punching some holes, and then double check everything. Measure twice, cut once. Place the point of the center punch directly on the center of the 4 small mounting holes and the large cylinder hole marked on the installation template, and strike with a hammer to transfer the marks onto the surface of the door and the door trim. There's no door trim just yet. Template's on there. That's where you take your center punch. Put it on there exactly. Don't let the the heel edge of your hand move the template at all. I like to just be delicate and get that center punch on there and hit it. Good, straight, and accurate. One time is all you need. Most likely. If you're dealing with a 14 gauge steel door, you might have to tap it a couple of times. Mark all 5 holes. All 5 of them. Don't pull the template off until you've marked all 5 holes. And it is the 4 holes for your mounting, which are the tiny ones, and then the 1 3/8 hole that will be located there as well. 1 1/4, 1 3/8. Step 3, drill the 1 3/8 diameter hole through the door. Take care to ensure that the drill bit is level and that the hole is straight through the door. Tip, bore the hole to the point of the tip, breaking through the opposite side of the door, and finish the boring of that hole out from the other side. So what they're saying is, you've got your 5 holes marked. You're going to do that cylinder hole first. Run that through the door, but be mindful to stop when the arbor bit, the pilot bit of your hole saw breaches, then stop. Reverse, pull the tool out, remove any core that you need to out of the hole saw, go to the other side. Now keep in mind, we had talked about the outside diameter of the cylinder collar. You're going to have a little bit of room. And if you drill that 1 3/8 hole, the fact that you're not going to be laser beam straight is not going to be a huge issue. But endeavor to be as straight as possible. Come back to the other side and clean the hole off. Now, using a hole saw, be mindful. When the tooth of that hole saw hit the face of the door, you don't want to rupture and tear the veneer out. I've seen that happen. What I would like to do, what I usually will do, is get that hole saw started down to where the teeth hit the face of the door. I'll put it in reverse because I'm scoring the face of the door to break that veneer so that when I come in, and I actually like a hole saw that's a little worn because the teeth are less sharp and less prone to really flare the veneer out. Drill through the opposite side of the door, make the 2 holes meet, clean off your tool, and then you're in good shape. Step 4 is now drill your 4 small holes with 1/8 of an inch bit, that's what you need, to a depth of 3/4 inch. If you're not sure what that is, measure off 3/4 inch on your drill bit, put a piece of masking tape around the drill bit itself, go to where the masking tape starts, and stop at that point. Use care to limit the depth of the hole to 3/4 to avoid drilling completely through the door. You don't want to do that because there's nothing on the opposite side of the door, the keyed or lock side of the door, to cover any misdrilled holes. And that's why you really need to check twice. Now, step 5 is where you're going to alter the length of the tailpiece. We hopefully have already done that. Then you're going to come with your cylinder and the 2 screws. This will come in from the exterior side. Okay. Now, what they've not given you, though, is the holes that you'll need to... Oh, no, forgive me. This will... these are the holes that we're dealing with now in your plate, which comes in step 7. Let's get to step 6. Slip the cylinder collar over the cylinder and insert it through the hole through the exterior. Position the keyhole at the bottom of the lock with the Segal trademark on top. So you can install it either way, but if you did, it's not going to work right because that tail piece is not in the right, it's not in the center of the housing. So if you install it upside down, your template is not adjusted for that. So regardless, the Segal name goes towards the top. Okay. Step 7, position the steel backplate on the inside of the door. Insert the 2 connecting screws through it. So what we're dealing with is something that's going to look like this. I think you get the concept of what I'm trying to emulate here. And then those 2 screws, after you've prepped them, or cut them if necessary, you're going to run through the mounting plate. And that mounting plate could be a lot smaller. It certainly could be a lot smaller. It doesn't need to be so large. Can't think of It's additional security if someone's trying to attack the door. I would argue that. So you position that plate on the inside. Your cylinder is coming from the outside. The tailpiece is coming through the plate, through this hole. Your 2 screws go in. And you're gonna. This will go on either side. Okay, and you'll secure the cylinder down onto the door. Position the steel plate. Insert the 2 connecting screws into the hole adjacent to the large hole in the center of the back plate and thread them into the holes in the back of the cylinder. Using a screwdriver, tighten the screws, making sure the back plate is positioned 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the door with the 4 small mounting holes, that the 4 small mounting holes are accessible. This is going to line up these notches with your holes that you have drilled to pre-drill the holes for the lock body. So your 5 holes were the hole for the cylinder coming through, then these 4. Step 8, with the deadbolt in the unlocked position, push and hold in the shutter guard and place the lock case over the back plate. That's where you push the shutter guard in, and then you're going to make this all just come together. Okay? Now it'll rotate that lock. Okay, the movement of the tailpiece. If someone were to attack the cylinder and yank that out, that's going to close off access to the inside of this lock, because at that point, anything that would emulate the shape of that tailpiece will be able to work the lock. Step 8, with the deadbolt in the unlocked position, push and hold in the shutter guard and place the lock case over the back plate. Make sure the tailpiece goes into the hole on the back of the lock that you've exposed by depressing the shutter guard. And then at that point, you are moving to step 9, and that steps 9 through 12 will be the next part of this video as well. Moving on with step 9 now, what they're saying is take the inside of the lock body and place it over everything. You've got it placed, and test the operation. Obviously, you'll insert the key into here and make sure that everything works very, very well. This is going to work well, but you want to make sure the cylinder on the outside is what's working well, okay? So that's going to be important to be able to work on that. Once you know that you've got some good, smooth operation, move on to step 10 and then run the screws through here, either the Phillips or the one-ways, in. Bring them to where the head starts to make contact with the body, just so it's a little loose. Test operation. Tighten up a couple of them. Test operation, then secure all of them. Once you know you're in good shape at that point. And that is indeed step 10. Now, step 11 is where you're going to install the strike. Now, you'll notice what they basically say to do is to just position the strike onto the frame is what you're going to do. You'll see that the angle of the strike, it's a bit easy to see there, but that angle goes away from the lock body. And you're going to get all that positioned. It's obviously a bit easier to do when it's on the door. Had the striking upside down. That's easy to figure that out right away because it won't it won't install properly. That strike is not symmetrical. And what I meant to say was the angled portion away from the lock body, the flat portion is what's to be up against the lock body. You've got an angle portion, you got a flat portion. The flat portion will go against the lock body. Not only is that, I guess, somewhat common sense, but it won't work otherwise. So when you've got the lock body on the door, you're going to get the strike physically put in place, and then test the operation, mark the holes, and then begin to install. And that's step 11. Let's look at step 11. Set the lock strike place in place. Okay, set the lock strike in place and set the lock in the locked position. If angle strike is being used, it must be mortised into the jamb. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Align the strike on the door jamb with the lock strike centered on the bolt. Make sure there is no interference between the bolt and the strike when operating the lock. Mark the position of the strike and then unlock the door and open it. Mark the center of the mounting holes for the strike and drill the 1/8-inch holes where they're marked. It may be necessary to shim the door frame or the mortise on the frame to achieve proper strike alignment. It's very likely that you are going to have to chisel the casing. You're going to have to shim something off. Hotels that were built in the Art Deco era had exceptionally ornate backbend and casing details. And if you've stayed in an older hotel like the Peabody in downtown Memphis, or the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne, these older buildings have ornate trim on the inside. And when they go to add those privacy locks, the flip-over door guards or the more modern style, they have to do some not insignificant modifications to the face of that trim to make it work. So expect to have to do that. There's no way for me to tell you how to go about doing that, except that you're going to have to make the strike and the lock body in this sort of orientation with each other. There's no room otherwise. Okay. Now, if you're doing an outswing sort of door, obviously you can install it like this, which would be a very common installation that I have done lots of times myself, where I've installed it on the push side rather than the pull side. You'll use the flat strike. And like I had said earlier, it's just common sense at that point how you're going to mount that. You're just going to have to locate it, mark it, drill it, ensure it works, and complete your installation. The only advice I can give you is a sharp chisel is worth its weight in gold when you're going to be doing work like this. Be very careful when you're chiseling into wood. You don't want to deform it or, even worse, crack it irreparably. So be mindful of that. Step 12 is place the strike over the holes on the frame. Once you've got the strike mortised, secured, be exceptionally careful. You've got shorter screws here. There might be 5 of them. Indeed, there are 5. Be exceptionally careful to pre-drill the holes and to not split the frame, because you're going into the frame in an unusual application or approach to the frame. Where the arrow is where you're going to be drilling. Lots of opportunity to split that frame open. The hole must be properly pre-drilled. And as you are running the screw, and do it by hand, don't do it with a screw gun or an electric drill. If you are really stressing it too much, stop and pre-drill that hole a little bit bigger. If you were to split the frame at this point, there's no elegant way to correct that problem. So be mindful not to destroy the frame when you're installing the strike. So step 12 is place the strike over the holes on the frame. Operate the lock again to make sure that the lock and the strike are in alignment. Attach the strike to the frame supplied with the 3/4-inch screws and a screwdriver. It basically says use the short screws and don't use the electric drill for doing that. Now the next part of this video is going to be talking about doing the same installation with the angle strike. Now, moving into the home stretch on our video, in the lower right-hand corner of page 2 is going to show reference to the angle strike, and I've got one pulled off the shelf to go through with you here. Overall height of that strike is going to be about 2 15/16. Overall width of the rabbet side of the frame is going to be about 1 5/16. Then the other face of the strike, about 1 1/16. Okay, same sort of relationship of the strike towards the edge of the lock. You can install it either way. Okay, the flat end again is this end towards the lock. It's obvious because this is the rabbet portion. This is the part of the strike that's going to attach to the face, and again, be super cautious of installing that. Now, what you could do, and I would encourage it, I had talked earlier about the angle strike having the advantage of the longer screws being able to hit the stud behind the frame. And if you believe the case that you have a stud behind there, I would certainly, for these two holes, get longer screws, and you might need to get some, or you might have a couple of left over that you can work with. But I can tell you this, that you're going to get them in the package, because you're getting 4 longs and 5 short. You know, for sure the short ones are going to be here and here, guaranteed. These can be the long ones, though. Properly pre-drill. The image down below, in the second page 2 of the installation instructions, show how you're going to mortise that, and that's maybe a good place where you can have the masking tape come in when you place that onto the frame, and then draw the outline and carefully chisel. You want to be really careful chiseling a frame because of the outside corner and how you're hitting the wood in relationship to the grain structure of the wood. Hitting it on the end can be dangerous, so be very cautious with that. Be very careful. A router is best. If you can do this all in the flat, if the door and frame aren't yet installed, to use a router would be a really nice way to go. Obviously, mark your position, make your chiseling, your shimming adjustments as indicated earlier with the flat strike accordingly. Pre-drill is crucial. Secure the strike. Test for alignment and proper operation. And at that point, your job is done. So, finally, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Segal locks and products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full Segal product catalog as it exists. And by all means, I encourage you to review that. A lot of people are going to use that Segal lock, hopefully for decades to come. It's a name that's tried and trusted throughout the industry when it comes to providing that home security that we had talked about earlier. If you have any questions on the Segal, this is that part number SE19323, double cylinder deadbolt and a brushed chrome finish with a flat strike, or any other Segal product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.